David, I see that Donald Trump's been talking again about how the King and Queen liked the Oval Office.
Yes, he keeps boasting that their response to his decor was, wow, that's really something.
King and Queen were just here and they looked and they said, this place is just amazing. When they came into the Oval Office, they said, this is something. And they've seen some very nice places. They've seen some great rooms.
Which is from the lexicon of compliments that might not be compliments. I can see them texting him with WTF and Donald Trump reading it as, wow, that's fantastic. I'm James Matthews.
And I'm David Blevins, both of us right here in the Trump 100 studio in Washington, D.C.
A tenuous truce in the Middle East, but for how long? Missiles are being fired, drones are back in the air, and the Americans say they've sunk Iranian military boats. We are back to the brink.
Donald Trump was back in front of the cameras on Monday afternoon. We'll digest everything he said. That won't take very long. Plus, the Supreme Court has abortion back on its mind.
And David, you've gone back to the scene of the shooting at the Correspondents Dinner, yeah?
Yes, back to the ballroom. It looked a little different, even if the memories were the same. We'll reflect and consider the conspiracy theories, the ones that say it was all staged.
So, David, another day, another twist in the war in the Persian Gulf. An information war as much as anything else. The Americans, they have begun efforts to restore traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. Donald Trump is calling it Project Freedom. The US Central Command, its military HQ, it said on Monday that 2 US merchant ships had passed through the waterway. Now, this Project Freedom is the president's newly launched venture to try to shepherd traffic from around the world through the strait. It has seen action in response from the Iranians. Vessels have been targeted by a number of cruise missiles, drones and small boats.
Yes, and the action wasn't limited just to the water. There were missile strikes on land too. The United Arab Emirates blamed Iran for targeting a major oil port there. Those attacks are the first of their kind since a truce was reached nearly a month ago. Missile defence systems were triggered in Dubai with the sound of booms heard overhead in the city, and 2 people were injured in a strike in the Omani coastal town of Buqa. In response, US Navy Seahawk helicopters sank 6 or 7 Iranian small boats that were targeting civilian vessels. Admiral Brad Cooper, he's the man who heads Central Command, said 6. Donald Trump said 7 in a post online. He posted that Iran had taken some shots at unrelated nations with respect to the ship movement, and that the US had shot down 7 small boats. It's all they have left, he added.
Yeah, we're getting different versions of what happened out of Washington and Tehran, but it seems clear this ceasefire is being put to a stress test as the president pushes the boundaries. There's a Tuesday morning briefing scheduled at the Pentagon, but on Monday afternoon we heard from the president himself. He was addressing small business owners in the White House, but he did touch on the big issue in the Middle East.
It was a passing reference, really, James, to the conflict. He didn't say anything new, which perhaps reflects the deadlock we're in right now. He said it's working out nicely and going very well. And then he called what was happening in Iran a mini war.
Our country's booming now, despite the fact that we're in I call it a mini war, because that's all they are.
That's a mini war that has seen some major activity in recent hours, depending on which version of events you choose to believe, and it has now lasted 9 weeks. The president said this would be over in a few days, then a few weeks, then told us it was already over and the Americans had won. So it's the same old story, really.
Yeah, and the issue of legality, that's reared its head again, and the president's alleged ignorance of it. Certainly that is the charge of his opponents. There's something called the War Powers Act. Now, that requires a president to seek Congress approval of military action within 60 days. Without it, he has to cease operations. It's not happening here, no cessation, because Donald Trump, well, he's told Congress it doesn't apply because hostilities have terminated. His opponents, they're pointing out that, if nothing else, this US blockade of Iranian ports is an act of war, and that's ongoing. So they're not happy. Neither, interestingly, was a senator by the name of Susan Collins. She's a Republican and she voted with Democrats to stop the conflict. It's the first time a Republican has changed their vote on the action in the Middle East.
And Congress is really discussing these things in something of a vacuum, or at least in a state of confusion, because you have the Iranians claiming their missiles hit a US ship, the Americans saying that's not true, but that they've sunk these small boats. It's a constant tit for tat. And all we can really do is weigh what is being said against what we actually know. And that is that the war has lasted much longer than they anticipated, that negotiations are stalled, and that Iran is still launching cruise missiles and drones and small boats against US-flagged ships and US naval vessels escorting them through the strait, despite the Pentagon telling us repeatedly that Iran's military has been decimated, to quote Pete Hegseth, the self-styled Secretary of War. And I think all of that explains why the Islamic Revolutionary Guard in Iran thinks it has America backed into a corner, so desperate for an off-ramp that it's now in a very weak negotiating position.
Yeah, it's difficult to see for me how this doesn't result in renewed military action by America, because it's difficult to see a break in that impasse on negotiations. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, he was on Fox News today. He's calling for the Chinese to help out with diplomacy. He pointed out they were buying 90% of Iran's energy, so he said they are funding the largest state sponsor of terrorism. Spiky talk ahead of Trump's trip to China next week, which of course, could be a source of friction. It's certainly not a great look for Trump when he sits down with Xi asking a favour before he gets there. It also, I think, lays bare his limitations in terms of getting what he wants, and it raises questions over his judgment and his strategic competence.
Trump's trip to China, James Matthews' trip to China, you're going to have much more to say about this in the coming days. Stay tuned.
Yeah, well, it's getting more interesting by the minute. Now, David, the dust has settled somewhat on the shooting at the White House Correspondents Dinner, which of course we attended last Saturday. Cole Allen, the suspected gunman, he was at a hearing in court on Monday. Questions have been raised over the conditions that he is being held in. He's been on suicide watch and restrictive housing in the DC jail where he's being held as things proceed.
Yes, the magistrate judge who presided over that hearing is a big proponent of defendants' civil rights and has not been pleased at all that Cole Allen has effectively been in solitary confinement without the evidence to suggest that he needs to be kept in those conditions. In fact, the judge even apologised to him and lambasted the Department of Corrections for not providing Allen with a Bible that he had requested in jail.
Yeah, the accused from California, he's alleged to have rushed through a security checkpoint, of course, armed with a shotgun and several knives during that dinner that we attended. The president, senior members of the cabinet, they were all there. Cole Allen, he faces several charges as a consequence, one of which is attempting to assassinate the president of the United States. Now, David, you have been back to the scene of the crime just a couple of days ago, yeah?
Yes, I found myself back in the Washington Hilton 1 week on, in the very room where we'd been lying on the floor in lockdown after hearing the thuds of gunshots just outside the door. Now, to get there, I had to retrace the steps we had taken on the Saturday night through the corridors, down the escalator. And having seen the CCTV of the suspect roaming those corridors because he had checked in the day before, you realise just how much security had been breached in advance of the event even taking place. And then I found myself back in the ballroom. And it was a very small thing, the pattern on the carpet, when I noticed it, that brought back the memories of the terror in those few seconds, because that was the carpet where we had taken shelter when heavily armed agents stormed the stage to make sure the president was secured.
Yeah, it was a chaotic period, wasn't it? Not for terribly long, but certainly for a minute and more. That the speed of movement in the place, the speed of people getting down as one, and the speed of teams, speeding into the crowd on that floor where we were, the pit, retrieving members of the cabinet, RFK Jr., Pete Hegseth. And when I look at the pictures of that happening, what strikes me is the faces of everybody involved. You know, you see it in Hollywood, you see the Secret Service agents, and it's that concentrated frown, the certainty of what they're up to and where they're going. You look at what actually happened in reality, and it's the faces for me, the uncertainty. You know, are we doing the right thing? Where is the danger? And just that lack of sureness that kind of feeds into that sense of danger at the time.
And I think for me, the most remarkable thing was the fact that there was no indication whatsoever that anything had happened in that hotel 1 week earlier. People were checking in, drinking coffee, going about their business as usual. And to me, it was a reminder of how quickly America moves on from these incidents. This was an attempted assassination of the President of the United States, and yet it already appeared to have been forgotten because when it comes to gun crime, much of it politically motivated, it's become a way of life here.
Yeah, the discourse around the events has been interesting to say the least. You'll remember, David, the initial reaction from many people online was not one of sympathy necessarily or concern, but one of conspiracy. In fact, the majority in amongst that flood of information and conspiracy theories seemed to be around the idea that the shooting was staged.
Yes, there was already some tension around this event because it was the first time the President had attended the White House Correspondents Association dinner while in office. And there was much debate about what he might say. In fact, Caroline Leavitt, White House press secretary, suggested during an interview before the dinner that shots would be fired. That has set social media alight after actual shots were fired. And there was the speed too at which the Secret Service responded, something the President himself even remarked was much quicker than normal.
Yeah, the word staged was trending on X on the Sunday after the shooting, alongside the word Butler, the site of the first assassination attempt of Donald Trump just weeks before the last election. There are those who feel that that was staged as well. Both claims, of course, are totally unsubstantiated. There are those who are claiming that the shooting at the Correspondents' dinner, it built support for Trump's new ballroom. There's no proof of that either, of course, although that is what the president and his allies have been advocating for ever since the shooting happened. For me, David, it's a matter of how many people would have to be in on the act that disproves the conspiracy. How many Secret Service agents, including the ones who fired their guns, would have had to be in on it. Presumably, you know, they were firing live rounds. If they weren't, if they were firing blanks, surely they would have suspicions at least. And in time, we would learn about that. If the rounds were indeed live, we'd learn soon enough if they'd been told to miss their target.
Yes, and while false flag or staged attacks do have some historical precedent, they are extremely rare and are getting rarer. Since the boom in social media, conspiracy theories have spread like wildfire online. And in recent years, some on the political right have even suggested that the mass school shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School and the January 6th riots were false flag conspiracies. In some instances, of course, President Trump failed to call out false rhetoric as conspiracy. You might even argue that he peddled it. And now those conspiracies have shifted to the political left, as we see with the Butler and the Washington Hilton assassination attempts.
Before we leave the Correspondents' dinner, David, did you see the footage of people who were there before they left grabbing the bottles of champagne?
I did, and I was a little surprised to see some people describing them as thieves because, of course, they had paid for their ticket.
Yes, and it wasn't cheap, but I did like the coverage of it. The article that was written talking about this room full of journalists, 2,000 of them, and how one of these people who picked up the champagne lifted one bottle, put it back and took another one. And the person who wrote the article called it good editorial judgment under pressure.
Alison Morris, a columnist with the Belfast Telegraph, posted online the footage of the bottle being taken with the words, "Americans criticising this woman, clearly unaware of the ancient art of minesweeping."
Okay, that wasn't the only headline in the Belfast Telegraph though, David, was it? It was one about a certain David Blevins. Come on.
Yes, the headline actually was, Northern Ireland's David Blevins on the
Which you are.
Washington Correspondents Dinner shooting. Our boss thought it was fascinating that the Belfast Telegraph thinks I belong to Northern Ireland.
You do that, don't you?
Yes, I belong to Northern Ireland, and Northern Ireland belongs to me.
There's a song in there somewhere. David, we should mention movement over at the Supreme Court. A decision's been made that affects women's access to abortion pills across the United States.
Yes, it's a rare win for pro-choice advocates during this administration. The Supreme Court has restored nationwide access to mifepristone, the widely used abortion medication. On Monday, the court issued a temporary order that will, for now, allow women to obtain that pill by mail.
Yeah, it's a temporary order, as you say, David. The ban on access has been paused by a judge. Mifepristone, it gets sent to states where abortion is banned, like Louisiana. And Louisiana had objected to its availability in that state. And that's what triggered the ban. The law has been that the pills couldn't be prescribed online or over the phone before being sent to patients who could be in another state. So that's what the law has been. That's been paused by this judge.
So that was the lower court's ruling on Friday. And that's what caused a lot of confusion for both providers and patients. And so the Supreme Court has now stepped in.
Yeah, it's allowed for a 7-day pause before the court rules properly on the matter. As for what happens next, whatever the ruling from this traditionally conservative court, it will, of course, have big ramifications for women's access to abortion across the country.
Remember, this Supreme Court ruling on mifepristone now is coming from the very same court that abolished the nationwide right to abortion in 2022. That said, it's also the same court which in 2024 rejected an attempt to restrict access to mifepristone. That ruling was on much narrower terms. So we will keep an eye on how this plays out. A big ruling coming. We're only 4 days into May. It looks like it's going to be as busy this month as every other month.
Yeah, and we'll stay across it all for you on the podcast. Thanks very much for listening and for watching. Do get in touch with us, the usual place, Trump100 at sky.uk.
We'll be back tomorrow.
All the best.
Bye-bye.